What if I told you the flood didn't kill all the giants? What if something survived? Something that was never meant to exist in the new world. Because the story we were told might be incomplete. The flood was not just a punishment. It was an erasure, a complete wiping away of everything that had gone wrong with creation. But before the waters came, the world had already changed. Something had entered it. Something unnatural. The Nephilim. You've probably heard the name before, but most people don't understand what it really means. These were not just giants. They were the result of something forbidden. Scripture describes them as the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. That single line has haunted scholars for centuries, because it suggests something terrifying, that beings not meant to walk the earth came down and created something new, something powerful, something unstable. And once they appeared, everything changed. Imagine living in a world where towering figures walked among humans, where strength meant domination, where violence became normal, where fear was constant. Ancient descriptions paint them as massive, yes, but also as corrupt. Their presence didn't just exist alongside humanity, it infected it. The earth became filled with violence. Not just human violence, but something deeper, something darker. And then comes one of the most chilling lines in Scripture, that all flesh had become corrupted. Not some, not many. Well, think about that. Whatever the Nephilim were, they didn't just exist, they spread. And God saw it. Not just the actions of humanity, but the state of the entire world. Everything had gone wrong, so a decision was made. Not to guide humanity back, not to correct what was broken, but to erase it completely. The flood was coming, and it would not be partial. It would not spare the powerful. It would not leave anything behind. Or so it seemed. The sky darkened, the air grew heavy, and then it began. Rain. But not the kind anyone had ever seen before. It didn't stop. It didn't slow. It intensified, day after day, night after night, until the ground could no longer hold it. And then something even worse happened. The deep broke open. Water didn't just fall from above. It rose from below, as if the earth itself was releasing something it had been holding back. And within days, everything was underwater. Mountains disappeared. Cities vanished. The world was swallowed whole. Every creature outside the ark, every corrupted being, every giant, gone. Or at least, that's what we've always believed. But here's where the story starts to break. Because if the flood truly erased everything, then explain this. Why do giants appear again? If the flood erased everything, then how do you explain what came after? Because generations later, something appears in the story that should not exist. And this is where it gets disturbing. The Israelites had just come out of the wilderness. They were approaching the land of Canaan, the land they were promised. But before entering, they sent spies to scout it. What they saw shook them. They came back afraid. Not of armies, not of weapons, but of what was living there. And then they said something chilling. We saw the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight. Stop and think about that. This wasn't exaggeration. This was fear. Real fear. Grown men, warriors, calling themselves insects in comparison. Which means one thing. The giants were back. Not one. Not a myth. Not a memory. But real. Living. Walking the earth again. So now the question becomes unavoidable. How do beings that were supposed to be wiped out return? There are only a few possible answers, and none of them are comforting. The first possibility is this: the flood didn't kill all of them. As impossible as it sounds, some ancient traditions suggest that one of the giants survived. Not by accident, but by endurance. A being so large, so powerful, that even the flood couldn't take him. And hidden deep within the biblical narrative, there's a name: Og, the king of Bashan. At first, he seems like just another ruler. Until you read the details. He is described as one of the last of the Rephaim, a race of giants. But what makes Og different is the evidence left behind. His bed. Scripture goes out of its way to describe it. Over 13 feet long. Think about that for a second. That's not symbolic. That's not poetic. That's a measurement. A physical trace of something massive. Something real. Now here's where it gets unsettling. Og lived after the flood. Which means, either giants returned somehow, or he never died in the first place. Imagine that. While the world drowned, while everything was being erased, something survived. Watching, waiting, enduring the destruction of everything else. And then, stepping into the new world like it belonged there. But Og wasn't alone. He was just the beginning of something that shouldn't exist. Because if one survived, then what else did? If one giant survived, then the flood didn't cleanse the earth. It only hid the truth. Because Og was not the end of the giants. He was proof. Proof that something ancient was still alive. And it didn't stop there. Because later in the story another figure appears. One you already know. But maybe not like this. Goliath. A warrior. A champion. A giant. Described as towering over men, covered in bronze, carrying weapons too heavy for normal humans to even lift. But here's the part most people miss. Goliath wasn't unique. He wasn't a one-time anomaly. He came from a place called Gath, a region known for giants, which means by his time, they were still around, still living, still fighting, still part of the world that was supposed to be cleansed. So now the pattern becomes clear. The flood happens. Everything is wiped out. And yet, giants appear again. Og, then others, then Goliath, again and again, like echoes of something that refuses to disappear. So we're left with two possibilities. And both are terrifying. The first, something survived the flood, not by chance, but because it couldn't be destroyed. Something that endured while everything else perished. Something that stepped into the new world carrying the same corruption as before. But the second possibility is even darker. What if the giants didn't survive? What if they returned? Think about it. The Nephilim were not just giants. They were the result of a boundary being broken. Between heaven and earth. Between what is allowed and what is forbidden. So what if that boundary was crossed again? What if the flood didn't stop it? It only delayed it? Because the Bible never explains their return. It doesn't give details. It doesn't warn you. It simply continues, as if the horror quietly came back. And that silence might be the most unsettling part of all, because it leaves the door open. If it happened once, and then happened again, what's stopping it from happening now? What's stopping something from crossing that line? Again, maybe the giants are gone. Or maybe they're just no longer as visible, hidden, buried in history, or waiting, just like they did before. And if that's true, then the flood didn't end the story. It only marked the beginning of something we were never meant to fully understand. Something ancient, something forbidden, something that refused to be erased.